Hey, folks. Zach Osterman here. I'm still figuring out this whole live thing. Forgive me. I'm trying to tweet out the link as we get started. But this is Mind Your Banners for, I guess, a special edition of Mind Your Banners from Monday, September 23rd, 2024. He is Kyle Neddenriep. We're going to let it rip. Are you ready, Kyle? We're letting it. Mike Woodson let it rip. Indiana picks up its first commitment in the 2025 class. I think it's fair to say long sort of anticipated. This has been, in some ways, the first class it's felt like Mike Woodson and his staff have really, really focused in state, and it's kind of an understandable class to do that. You know, Trent Sisley, Braylon Mullins, Jalen Harrelson, all top 100 prospects. And now Sisley is the first one to commit, and it is to Indiana. I think, you know, other schools that seem to be sort of mentioned prominently in his recruitment by the end would have been Purdue, obviously, plus maybe Michigan State, maybe Notre Dame. But Sisley winds up committing to IU after his official visit this weekend. And I guess the first question for you, Kyle, is just, I know you've seen, I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this will have seen Sisley, but I know you've seen a lot of him in a lot of different settings. You've watched him develop. He was a prospect that was, you know, kind of on the wider recruiting radar from very early in his career. How have you seen him just kind of develop maybe especially these last couple of years as he has sort of matured into a high major prospect and obviously now playing his final season of prep ball down at Montverde?
Yeah, I actually had a chance to, to see Trent even, I think it was right before his freshman year of high school. I went down and spent some time with him and his family, and kind of knowing even at that time, you know, that he could be a guy that was going to be this type of player, you know. And I think at that time, people were projecting him as that, you know, a potential IU commit or recruit anyway, and a guy obviously from Southern Indiana with a lot of interest in IU growing up and whatnot. So you always kind of think of him as that, you know, that potential, Indiana recruit when it comes down to it. So I think it's a credit to him. He's kind of lived up to the promise in a lot of ways. And, you know, I know he took some, you know, having talked to him this summer when he made the decision to go to Montverde. I mean, it was something that, you know, he heard some negativity about it and whatnot. I wrote a little bit about that today, you know, in the takeaways from his commitment. But, you know, I think in his estimation, this is going to make him a better player. Whether he's right or wrong about that, you know, I don't know that we'll know that, maybe ever, you know, because you can't really compare it against something that doesn't happen, which is him staying at Heritage Hills. But the bottom line is I think he wanted to better himself against better players, and he felt like that was the best way to do it. I would say as a player, you know, his versatility, I mean, it sounds like a generic word, I guess, but that is really kind of what stands out, I think, about him is, you know, he's a wing who can, you know, he can post up. He's probably going to post up a lot at the college level, but he can play inside. He can, you know, he can face up. He can shoot the three effectively. Maybe not known as a three-point shooter as much as a guy like a Mullins or whatnot, but he can knock him down. He's an athletic guy who can guard multiple spots, which is, I think, just as important on the next level. And he works his tail off. I mean, that sounds like another generic thing to say, but I think that's maybe his best quality is he's just a worker, you know, and I think that's going to bode well, you know, for his future, you know. And I think it's fair to say, and I think Adam Finkelstein wrote about this in the 24/7 assessment of him, is maybe he doesn't have the highest of high level as maybe, some of the other guys in the class, like even like a Sisley or Mullins, you know, for projection wise, but I think he's a multi-year, very outstanding multi-year player, potentially. You know, that's kind of the potential at the next level. So I agree with that assessment. I think he's a player who can come in and be a multi-year impact player for you, and maybe pretty quickly, you know, as we kind of see his progression through this year and then into next spring and kind of see where he's at that point. But I think this is going to help. You know, and I hate to, you know, from a standpoint of not being able to cover him regularly, I don't love the prep school stuff, but I will say I think it made it was a tough decision for him, and it took a little bit of courage to do that. So, you know, like I said, whether it's right or wrong or whatever, who knows? But I think he made the decision. I think it's going to, he thought would help him the most at the next level. Zach, you're muted.
There we go. I was getting emails and I didn't want like the Outlook chime to be ringing through. But no, the first thing I kind of wanted to follow up on there was you and I have both been around long enough to see guys who come through who get, I don't want to call it hype because hype always seems like it's something sort of, I guess, malicious in a weird way. But guys that are, kind of burst out onto that national stage young, and then whether they stop growing or, just something goes sideways with their development or whatever, injuries just never quite fulfill it. You have, as you said, you went down and spent time with Sisley, I think, before even his freshman season. Obviously, you've covered a lot of him these last couple of years. What in your mind has kind of allowed him to be one of these guys that is on the radar early as, hey, this should be a pretty good Big Ten player. This should be a guy who's a legitimate, whether it's top 50, top 100, but a high major college prospect, that he has just kind of every step of the way continued to live up to that. You talk about his work ethic, obviously his versatility, particularly I think defensively is where maybe that's particularly intriguing for a program like Indiana. But just what do you think has allowed him to just kind of constantly meet that bar when, ultimately it got set pretty high for him pretty early in his career?
Well, I think a lot of it's just physical maturation, and I remember seeing him play. I think it was after his, it was going into his sophomore year at Heritage Hills, and even at that time, I was like, man, he looks like a totally different player physically, just way more aggressive, assertive, whatever word you want to put on it. He was just attacking the basket, playing with abandon, and that's kind of how I think of him as a guy who's just kind of always making stuff happen, always, whether it's offensively or defensively, attacking the glass, being a guy who's going to be a high energy type of player. And I think that's where he's continued to, and again, that's probably the biggest jump I saw from him, going into his sophomore year even, and then continually, obviously physically to just get stronger and better. And I think also too, and I think it does help him, and you talk about, his own, personal improvements and whatnot, but I think it's going to be good for him where he's played like he's been the guy at his high school team. He's been the main guy, the star player, the guy that everybody puts on a scouting report, number one. I think that's a good thing and of course, a lot of high school players are in that position, but some more than others. And I think he's definitely been that. I mean, everybody's out to get him, in Southern Indiana, they're all wanting to beat Trent Sisley and beat Heritage Hills. So I think that's a good thing for players to have to go through and be kind of the marked man. So I think that has allowed him to improve a lot. And, and I do think now, he's in a little bit different role, or he was too with his AAU team, where you're one of several guys being accounted for. And I think that'll be kind of a similar case at Montverde. But I do think that, being the guy everyone's trying to stop, you have to figure out different ways to go about your business. And granted, they're not always playing the highest of high-level 4A teams, but they did play a very competitive schedule for their level. And, he played against a lot of good players, and I thought he played really well in the junior all-stars too. So, I think he's he's had a lot of things thrown at him, and he's obviously the all-time leading scorer down there in 3 years. So, that tells you something too. But yeah, I just think a lot of it's physical, and a lot of that's probably similar to a lot of players at his level. But you're definitely right, because, we see a lot of times where players don't pan out coming into their freshman year. And I remember when our headline, I think, referenced, Damon Bailey, back when we originally wrote about him, and it's like, man, that's a lot to put on a guy. But that's kind of the reality of it. Everybody knew who he was even then, pretty much. So he's had a lot, I don't want to say pressure, but just a lot of eyeballs on him from an early age, and he's been able to live up to it. And I don't think he minds that a whole lot.
I can't get off mute. There we go. We're figuring out StreamYard. We were so used to Zoom, and now everything's in a different place. You mentioned Montverde Academy, obviously transfers down there. Indiana fans will be very familiar with Montverde the last few years. Jalen Hochefino came through Montverde. Malik Renew came through Montverde. Other players have come through Indiana, recruited that wound up at other schools. Obviously, this is a slightly different situation, and I've been trying to think of an example, and I'm sure if I sat here long enough, I could find one, but where Indiana recruited a player from the state that wound up leaving the state for prep school, but then committing to come home. Robert Vaden, I think, comes to mind. I think Vaden did a prep year out in New England somewhere. There might be someone more recent I'm forgetting. But I'm particularly intrigued by the move for someone like Sisley, who, we'll see kind of what Indiana's roster situation is right away next year. Obviously, there's a number of guys that Indiana's either likely or guaranteed to lose off of this team, particularly if it does perform up to its expectation and is one of the better teams in the Big Ten. It's not hard to imagine a couple underclassmen going along with obviously a bunch of guys, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, Umar Ballo, and others who will just be out of eligibility after the season. So there will probably be a lot of minutes for Indiana to sort of offer players to compete for. But the reason I'm really interested in your opinion on what Montverde might do for someone like Sisley is that versatility. Is that he's listed at 6'7". You talk about he's had a posted game in high school. Maybe that doesn't consistently translate in college. Although depending on your matchup, sometimes you get teams that play a little smaller. Sometimes you like to do that sort of post up game with somebody who's a little bit more flexible. I think about some of the success Indiana had with Christian Watford, for example, where as his career developed, he was a really good rebounder and 3-point shooter. But at times, Indiana would really sort of, when teams tried to go small on him, they weren't afraid to post Watford up either. But I think in particular defensively, just what do you think it will do for him as somebody who, part of his profile as a recruit, as a prospect, really does seem to be his potential defensive flexibility, his potential sort of, his potential sort of impact as a guy that can defend 3, even 4 positions as he develops in college. What do you think going to an elite prep school like Montverde that's going to be playing, basically probably about as high level of a schedule as anybody in the country can in the prep circuit? What do you think that does for him, especially maybe challenging some of those areas that we look at and we say if he's really going to be kind of a dynamic player in college, it's going to be in part because he can do this list of things. Just how important do you think maybe this year is for him challenging himself? And if nothing else, maybe kind of getting a sense for, hey, if I'm going to be able to do this against elite guys in college, I've got to get better here and here and here and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I had a chance last week to talk to his dad a little bit about that and just kind of how it's going so far. And it sounds like he loves it. Hadn't obviously we're only September 23rd and we hasn't played games yet or anything like that. But I think the whole purpose, I did talk to Trent about this a while back, but just getting a chance to play even in practice every day against that type of competition, I think is what really appealed to him when he ultimately made that decision. I don't think he would have gone to any, he wasn't looking to leave, just to go anywhere. This was sort of the, they won the Geico National Tournament last year, just loaded with talent, and again will be one of those top. Actually, it's not Geico, is it? Chipotle now, I believe it is, but whatever the case is. But they won the national tournament, and so he's going to be playing against the best competition, not only in games but practice. So I think that's where he's really that's what appealed to him, and I think again, he's going to play against guys who are going to challenge him, laterally, challenge him, around the basket. And I think that's kind of the hope for him, is that, okay, I'm going to see all this. It's going to make me kind of rise to another level of competition that's going to allow me to be able to play next year, and I think that's the biggest thing, is just like, what's the best path to get me ready to play as a freshman at IU, which it turned out to be IU. So, I think that's kind of the reason he, wanted to go that direction. And I think, like I said, we'll find out, I guess next year how that ultimately transpired. But I think that's it's an interesting case study, I think. And obviously didn't make that decision without really thinking about it with him and his family and the things he lost out on as a senior too, like, potentially going for Mr. Basketball, which was always a big thing for him. He's kind of putting this experience ahead of that to, try to ready himself for playing at IU.
Just a couple more questions for you. I know you're a busy man with commitments all over the map, and we really do appreciate you joining us. The first one isn't, and I guess I just want your opinion as much as anything else, but I wrote about this, kind of at some point, kind of midsummer, and I wrote about it again today with Sisley's commitment. This sort of what turned out to be a mistaken perception that when Mike Woodson was hired, he would just sort of recruit the state and nothing else. There was just this sort of assumption that if Indiana was sort of running home to its roots, to an alumnus, that he would be, really taken by the idea of prioritizing players in state. He himself obviously is an Indianapolis native. But Trent Sisley is the first commitment that Mike Woodson offered, recruited, and committed, and then will eventually sign. The only other in-state player he signed out of high school, because he's signed a couple free transfers, but the only other in-state player Indiana has signed out of high school in Woodson's tenure is C.J. Gunn, who obviously committed to the previous staff, and then Woodson, sort of recommitted him, or whatever term you want to use. Gunn honored the commitment through the coaching change. I'm just curious for your perspective as somebody who obviously, Indiana, just like Purdue, just like some others, is always going to cast kind of a long shadow in prep basketball in this state in terms of its influence, and IU fans wanting to see local players on the roster and sort of homegrown players, if you want to call it that, involved at the highest level, whether it's long-term history or even just the recent history of somebody like Trace Jackson Davis or Trey Galloway. We saw a lot of those guys from the 2013 team in Bloomington this weekend because Victor Oladipo was inducted into the IU Hall of Fame. Just what's been your perception of, or maybe your opinion, I'm not sure, take it kind of whatever direction you want, but just the fact that it hasn't really been seemingly until this class that Indiana has really kind of tried to dig its hands in state. There have been maybe a handful of isolated recruitments. Indiana was involved with Xavier Booker, and there have been a couple others here and there, but it has not necessarily felt like recruiting the state was, sort of an overemphasized priority. I think the way I put it was Mike Woodson has just kind of gone where the talent was, and this time around, in his mind, the talent was in his backyard. Trent Sisley, Braylon Mullins, Jalen Harrelson, etc. What is from your side as constantly looking at things sort of more through the prep lens, what's it been like to kind of maybe watch an IU coach that a lot of people assumed was just going to sort of live and die with in-state recruiting to some extent, be, I think it's fair to say, quite a bit more selective than he was expected to be?
Yeah, it's something I am asked about, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it too. We've probably talked about this before. I don't even know what the word is, sort of the perception, I guess, of how much it matters and how much it really does matter is always kind of fascinating to me. Because I think the Tom Crean era was, and we don't have to relitigate all of that necessarily, but just sort of that era was sort of, revolved somewhat around in-state recruiting and people's perception of, man, you missed out on this guy and this guy. And there was all these reasons for each one of them, and it wasn't all one thing. It wasn't all even on Tom Crean, really, but some of that perception, when things started going awry or not going the way people thought they should, I think the perception of that, kind of led to, people feeling some way about it. Like, why are we letting, other schools come in like Michigan State or, even the in-state battles against Purdue to an extent. And Purdue really, and the curiosity with this one for me is that Purdue has really kind of had their way with really the guys that they've gone after. They've been able to get in early and get them. And I think that's been really a big thing for them. In state-wise, they've really dominated here lately. Even, some guys, obviously, IU didn't go after either. Like Braden Smith, it never really got to that point where anyone else was, it started to get there, but Purdue kind of got in and got a commitment before much else happened. But yeah, I mean, I would say, this class is really one you wanted to be in on, whether you're talking about, and all the in-state schools were involved with a lot of these guys, with Mullins, with Harrelson, with Brady Kaler, Trent Sisley, Stink Robinson's going to Butler, from Lawrence North. So, Butler's been, so it's been
sorry to cut across you. Is this, do you think, the deepest class the state's had since maybe, I don't know, 17? I'm not trying to pick on other classes, but I mean, does it have that kind of feel in your mind of, just like almost like top to bottom, that both the strength at the top, but also the depth?
Yeah, I'd say it's one of the most deepest classes I've covered in my time. 2012 definitely comes to mind as one that was very, very deep, and 17 was a really good one too. I've had this summer talked to some guys from that 17 class, and they, obviously your own class, you're always going to back. But yeah, I'd say this one, and I think most people agree, especially the fact that a lot of these guys have stayed at that top 100 level, and even you've had some others come in there like Brady Kaler, who's now a top 100 player. So that class. The class has just been really good. But yeah, I think it's going back to the original point. I think ultimately we won't know how much it ultimately yields until Trent Sisley's done, and then we can kind of decide. But it certainly matters. We saw it with Romeo Langford. Going back to his commitment and how big of a deal that was. I think you were there too. I mean, we were down for the commitment ceremony, and it was just a huge thing at that time. And that one was a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely an element of like, we need to keep our guys at IU, that there's that sentiment, but also, maybe when you're not winning as much, it becomes more of a bigger factor than it actually is. You're not going to get everybody. I mean, that's always, I think, sort of a misnomer, is that you're not going to keep everybody at home. Purdue's going to get some, there's some are going to leave. Michigan State basically operates somewhat like an in-state school. They come in a lot. Other schools obviously do too. So it's hard. I mean, you're not going to get everybody, but I do think, when you got guys you've been recruiting for this long, like Trent Sisley, and you're able to get them, that's a big deal. It's a big win. It's something in your column. You can say, hey, this is what we're doing to keep. We believe in recruiting our home state, and this is evidence of it. And I do think from that standpoint, it definitely matters. And like I said, we'll find out how much on the court it matters. And I think it will. I believe Sisley's going to be a really good player. But I do, yeah, from a momentum and, pride standpoint, it's hard to, quantify all that, but I think it does matter.
The last thing I'll ask, I'm not going to ask you for a prediction, but I know people would not want me to let you out of here without obviously at least touching on the other two in-state recruitments that Indiana is still heavily involved in. Jalen Harrelson, who by all accounts is probably, moving toward some kind of resolution sooner rather than later. I think there's sort of differing, information or rumors on when and how exactly that might be, but that's certainly the feel. And then I know you reported that Braylon Mullins, who was on campus with Trent Sisley, obviously he's a AAU teammate, another top 100 recruit, in some places a 5-star recruit in the 2025 class, will be trimming his list soon. I think he's still got a visit on the schedule to Kentucky, but generally speaking, there is a feeling that in his own process, Mullins might start at least sort of, working his way toward whatever he wants the conclusion to look like, however he wants the timeline essentially of his decision to kind of play out. To what extent, if any, like I said, I'm not going to ask you to predict where those guys are going, but to what extent, if any, do you think a development like this could affect either of those players? I think Sisley and Harrelson have known each other for a long time. Obviously, Mullins and Sisley played AAU basketball together in Indiana Elite. I don't think anybody's ever used the words package deal in any, remotely conceivable sense. But, do you think that this could affect this could make Indiana, more or less appealing for either of those other two in-state recruits that obviously the Hoosiers are still very much interested in committing.
Yeah, I mean, I and Braylon was there. Obviously, you may have mentioned that already, but was there also this weekend for his official visit. Yeah, and I think that's from last I have checked in. He's planning to cut it. It's not. I don't think any huge surprise. That he's cutting it down to probably going to be 5, but could be even shorter than that even. And I use squarely in that mix for Braylon Mullins. And I think it only helps that they just got a visit from him. Those visits normally yield pretty good results of it. It's interesting over the years. You don't hear of many bad visits, but there are some. There are some memorable ones that I've heard about, and sometimes that does happen. But yeah, Harrelson seems to be, last I've heard was really kind of honing in on, deciding something, in a pretty short amount of time. Mullins could be a little bit longer than that. I think, but not too long. I don't think it's going to go up until, I think originally he was kind of going to wait till, right around signing day. It's not going to be that. It doesn't sound like. I think it'll be earlier than that. But yeah, I mean, I think IU definitely is in the mix with some others for both those guys. I think Jalen, he had a visit a couple weeks ago to Notre Dame, an official visit. And then he canceled. He was originally going to go to Purdue this weekend, ended up canceling that visit. I don't know that, that was probably going to happen probably anyway, but and then canceled Missouri and Kansas. So, he's kind of getting close, and Braylon is getting closer, I would say. So, it's we're coming down to the wire. It's exciting. I think it's really exciting, probably for IU fans, probably for, a lot of the fans who are, kind of, maybe it's more exciting for those fans than it is these kids, to a certain extent. But, yeah, we're getting there, and where it all shakes out, it will be interesting. It'll be fun to see where they end up going and how all of it fits together. They all have really vastly, even though they're kind of all the same, maybe roughly the same size, they're all vastly different players, which is fun. So I think if they do end up, Trent's obviously committed already. If all three of them commit to IU, they all three kind of bring something different to the table. So, but yeah, I'm not, we'll see what happens, but yeah, it's pretty exciting, and all three of them really good players.
We'll leave it there. I've already kept Kyle 7.5 minutes longer than I told him I would. But this has been a lot of fun and hopefully interesting for all of you who either watched or listened live or will listen on the podcast or watch on my YouTube channel or the IndyStar YouTube channel. We are nothing if not multimedia at Mind Your Banners in this year of our Lord 2024. He's Kyle Neddenriep, Preps Insider, Indianapolis Star. I'm Zach Osterman, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. This has been Mind Your Banners, a Mind Your Banners special. Trent Sisley commits. You can go to IndyStar.com/sports for more on that. Kyle's got a piece there. I've got a piece there. And as Kyle just talked about, there may well be more that develops as the fall carries on from a recruiting standpoint for Indiana in state. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you soon.